Drums of War, Chapter 28, Frontlines. In what was probably once a foundry. The first shot trundled along, unconcerned with the small arms fire smashing off its battle screens. Private First Class Michael Nguyen was likewise unconcerned, as the enemy crunchies didn't carry anything that could trouble them. He did keep a close eye on the placement and firing lines of friendly tanks. On the other hand, as friendly fire was a much more worrisome threat. It seemed that once the Aspendel Bunyan, or whatever they were called, had fallen into the trap of thinking that having no ammo limit was superior to the transfer of kinetic energy, and had gone to direct energy weapons exclusively, they just had never had to fight anybody with decent battle screens before. In any case, Private Nguyen could relax, just a little, as his responsibilities in this push were mainly to help maintain position, and spotting was a lot less crucial. Sergeant Zygmunt was picked targets by eye, but when Private Nguyen noticed signs of what might be a vehicle, he always made sure to send it to the tank commander's HUD. Even so, the crew compartment was hot, stuffy, cramped and smelly. He envied the humans on the team with their duller sense of smell. Enemy infantry spotted 3 o'clock, 2.6 clicks, Sergeant Zygmunt called out. Target acquired, Specialist Rodriguez said. Cluster frag suggested. Cluster frag authorized, Sergeant Zygmunt rattled off. Cluster frag loaded, Private David confirmed. Shot out, Specialist Rodriguez chanted. Now Crunchies just called in for artillery. They want us to fire for effect on that enemy formation. Specialist Collins purred. They say hit effective. You see a problem, Green Kitten? No, sir. Just trying not to visualize what the readouts mean. The enemy only exists to be destroyed, Private. I know, sir. I just wish they'd quit being the enemy. You're to see MH on the next rotation, the sergeant said simply. I can regulate, sir. That was an order, Private. I'll write it down if you insist. Yes, sir, I'll see MH on the next rotation. Private Nguyen sighed before something caught his eye. Sir, enemy armor 5 clicks out. Target acquired, Specialist Rodriguez began again. Private Nguyen tuned them out and focused on his screens. Private Patel offered a sympathetic pat on his shoulder and said, It's just maintenance, like changing our screen projectors out. The shrinks have more important patients to help, he muttered darkly. But instead of brooding further, something more caught his eye. Sir, anti-orbital artillery placement here, requesting triangulation now. Do it. He had seconds, and somehow each one that crept by as he waited for the sensor pings from the 2 nearest tanks, as if they knew they had to count for as much as possible. He began a preliminary calculation for a firing arc, and once he got additional sensor data from his counterparts, he checked his math, found it optimal, and sent it to Specialist Rodriguez. Target acquired, suggest HEAP. The Specialist Rodriguez bellowed as Private Nguyen watched as one of the great plasma batteries slowly angled down to target across the ground. Evasive action! The tank quite suddenly altered course as Corporal Johnson slammed the tank into high gear and opened the throttle. Well, that wasn't how it worked exactly, but that's how Private Nguyen thought of it. I'm jamming their sensors, but they must have a spotter, Specialist Collins yelled. HEAP loaded. Fire! Shot out. Hit! Target damage. Triangulation again. This time, Private Nguyen started by plotting a course for Corporal Johnson and choosing a firing position along that course to begin his calculations from. The great plasma guns took aim and fired. Hot plasma streaked across the ground, scoring deep furrows of scorched turf and molten minerals behind, and missed the first shot. 3 other tanks were hit. One of them took the hit in the side and became so much slag, while the other 2 took hits on their more armored fronts and kept moving. Private Nguyen got a sensor data, checked his calculations, made some minor corrections, and sent them along. Target acquired. Fire when ready. HEAP loaded. Shot out. Private Nguyen watched with bated breath. Specialist Collins fired exactly on the mark that he provided, and the angle was good. The arc followed the predicted path and hit. Triumphantly, he called out, Target hit! Target destroyed! Good work, men, Sergeant Zygmunt breathed. Good eye, Green Kitten. On the surface of the Sci-Qua, Specialist Lee Wei was starting to feel like training wheels on a tricycle. What was the point of him in the enemy's weapons couldn't even breach the battle screens of their armor, and hasn't even touched anyone's armor plating so far that he's seen. To be a rifleman with the red crosses on his shoulders, apparently. Just as well, There were a lot of enemies on this planet. It had been one of theirs after all. He was starting to really believe that what the vets said. The enemy only exists to be destroyed, and if they knew that, they'd quit being the enemy. He was starting to earnestly wish for the second part. He'd been attached to the all-veteran squad, not a single private among them, all private first class or above, and specialized to be mobile infantry in support of CAV. Not a bad attachment for a medic's first tour, not at all, except for a few minor irritations. Grainy Doc said one of those minor irritations, who Specialist Vey had once only mistakenly called by name Private First Class Kwame Osei. He had been mercilessly laughed at and mocked for brute formality, and now knew better, and called the man Sawyer. Sawyer was making a minor irritation again. "Eat something." "I'm not hungry," Specialist Vey said, hoping to return to the contemplation of his military career. "You haven't eaten in over 6 hours," Sawyer said. "I hold you down and make you eat it if I have to." Corporal Maria Trigger Silver thumped his head with a gauntlet and said sternly, "Listen to Sawyer, Greenie." "I outrank him," Specialist Vey grumbled, as he nonetheless opened his faceplate and took in the arid air of the strange world. "You're about a cuntier better than a boot," Private First Class Dmitri Tank Volkov shot, and Specialist Vey could feel the man's raised hackles. I'm going," he grumbled as he made his way towards the hastily erected cook station, consisting of some MRE crates and some water jugs, a big pot, and a campfire made from the shards of some wooden furniture that likely belonged to a slave driver. "Thank fuck we weren't issued crayons." "Even so, you're not eating out of a bag," the specialist Anna Petrova. "I worked a little magic and made paprikash. Eat up, Greenie Doc." "Thanks, babushka," Specialist Vey murmured as she dished some of the impossible stew out for him. "Any idea when we can armor off?" Specialist Petrova stirred her brow and said, "Probably in another 3 hours. You'll probably want to use the latrine if you can. Nobody likes using the in-armor systems." "Any word on the objective?" "Turns out the RNI intel was good. Underground slave pens, dug-in fortifications, anti-armor emplacements. We might actually be at risk in the next push, so keep your medkit handy." "Hostages?" Private First Class Nguyen Pockets Tran handed Specialist Vey a spoon from somewhere and told him, "From the chatter I'm listening to, they haven't thought of that yet. They're all warriors today. We show our word to Axo, may the stars blah 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 and shit." Private Muhammad Rahman muttered darkly as he performed maintenance on his sidearm. "Can't count on that hair," Corporal Gabriela Costa reminded everyone. It was little wonder that she got called Sarge. "Has anyone heard what the condition of the water noodles is like from the other liberated camps?" Private First Class Rajesh Patel asked, as he nonchalantly tinkered with a dead pack and as he ambled over for some stew. "Hey Nitro, you not do that next to an open flame?" called Private Osai. "It's fine, it won't go off without a priming charge." "R&I got most of the other camps before we landed," Corporal Javier Napoleon Morales said, with his customary thick Franco accent. "We can expect them to be bruised, underweight and overheated in the best case, but some have been beaten, electrocuted, chemically tortured, or had limbs amputated and replaced with substandard cybernetics. I spoke with naval infantryman at the beachhead, and he said that it was a part of breaking them to slavery." "Slaves beating slaves," Specialist Vey muttered and tried not to heap up his actually quite tasty stew. "If they're shooting at you, they're the enemy," Corporal Costa said harshly. "The enemy only exists to be destroyed," Specialist Vey agreed morosely. "If they knew, they'd quit being the enemy," Specialist Petrova said comfortingly. Specialist Vey started to think that having no injuries to patch up wasn't such a bad thing after all. In a densely populated era of Ex Nuva, Private George looked through his scope and made a minuscule adjustment. He exhaled and squeezed the trigger. 2.5 miles away, a frothingly enraged priestmaster lost his head more literally. It felt good to kill the slavers. He had to kill slaves too, but that was something that he could bear, because it had to be borne by somebody, and he was one there, the one who had volunteered. The drop pods had hit, and he was men Overwatch. Well, he was meant to be. But the dropped companies had their own ASDSS. He was free to range out a little and find some targets who needed eliminating. Besides, they were busy establishing beachheads for the army or rescuing civvies where possible. Turns out the prisoners in the AOE were in an area too well fortified. He was busy dismantling the enemy chain of command for the area, so the army would have an easy time stomping over the slave army. Hell, some of the poor bastards might have even surrendered. None had so far, though. But on the other hand, the army was busy riding their dropships by another name down the nice entry corridors Private George's R&I brothers had established for them. This was an enemy planet right through to the mantle, though, so Private George didn't begrudge the army digging them out. The R&I was for shock operations and relied on mobility and hard hitting at vulnerable points. The army was an overwhelming force. Just so, he was making use of his scout pattern R&I power armor to be very, very mobile, and had dispensed with stealth. Well, not entirely. He hadn't set his armor to midnight black with the burning sanguine eyes of standard combat, but instead had it set to adaptive camo. It matched color with his surroundings in shifting splotches to break up his silhouette and make him more difficult to spot. Not that spotting him would do the warriors much good unless they brought out their tanks, artillery, or anti-tank weaponry. Even then, they'd have to catch him sitting still long enough to retarget. He never did. He smiled as another initiate highborn supported a new hole through his torso the width of a grapefruit. It felt good to kill the slavers. Private George, came a voice over his comm. You are out of position. Ranging out to disrupt enemy command. ETA on the army dropship. 5 minutes. You have 2 squads from Eagle Company converging on the LZ for added support. You are to provide overwatch and on-site intel. Aye, sir, Private George said as he took another shot. The dead warrior lead was a weight on his shoulders. He mag-locked his anti-personnel rifle to his back and loped back to a good vantage position near the LZ to provide overwatch of the landing. In position, I see the boats. Don't call them that, the voice chided. The army is very touchy about their ships not being ships. Private George snickered quietly with the voice over the comms. The support squads might have actually had to work to secure the perimeter, except the LZ was on top of surf housing, and Private George had thrown the enemy command structure into chaos. The army boys lumbered out of the dropships in their hulking army main infantry patterns, and Private George groaned. It seemed to him that the R&I squads agreed with him, as they groaned as well. The fuck are you doing in slow suits? One of the R&I squad sergeants demanded. The fuck are you doing in fucking tin cans? The army lieutenant responded. And that is, the fuck are you doing in slow suits, sir? Aye, sir, the squad sergeant said stiffly. Private George, get down here and give the army boys the DL. Aye, Sergeant, Private George said, as he gave the area a final scan. No threats found. Then he leaped down, ran across the roof of the army dropship, and dropped to the roof where the army platoon was gathering. He gave them a closer look and said, Good, you brought some combat engineers and heavies. Wow, no complaints about going too slow? The army lieutenant asked sarcastically. Sir, I have a job to do, Private George said flatly. By all means. First, the people housed in this complex pose no threat. Send some combat engineers to seal up the building access points to keep the slaves inside out of the crossfire. They're labor slaves, and not allowed to so much as ball up a fist, so they won't pose any threat and will only get in your way if you don't keep them locked down. The approach will be lightly defended for about 5 miles, so if you can get up to a nice 30 miles per hour, the R&I can clear the way for you, and you can focus on moving forward. There might be a warrior here and there who can take a pot shot at you, but they won't have anything that can go through your battle screens. When we get up to the facility, that's when we'll need your heavy equipment. I suspect a slave instructor gathered the Latreille up to keep them out of the crossfire. They call him 12 in Wote Reformist. Here, he demonstrated the word. He has been as helpful an asset in my operations, and I would prefer if he did not die in the crossfire. The main facility is located in the converted upper level of the depleted mine. You might have trouble operating in tight spaces once in the facility. The prisoners will be considered a hazard by friendly fire. So load your munitions accordingly and be sparing with frag and fire. That's, detailed, the army sergeant said. I've been here for almost a month. You should have the maps already, but I have a local copy if you didn't pay attention at your briefing, Private George said. 6 soldiers raised their hands, and Private George took a second to send it over, and one to the LT, as it was likely more detailed than the one the army had issued. Thank you, Private. Let's move out, the lieutenant said. Aye, sir. But one more thing. You see bones jutting out from their chins, that means their local equivalent to a medieval lord. Kill them on sight, or you'll have to find out what they did and convene a tribunal. Or maybe you get to live with making someone else do the work. Let's try to go fast as possible. They tend to start murdering slaves when they don't get their way. They think it'll get their god to intervene. Christ, that's a cold one, Private George heard another soldier mutter. He suspected that he'd meant it for the private to remark to his fire team, but had forgotten to change comms channels. Private George didn't care what anyone thought. He had a job to do. In a heavily converted fortress, Warrior 05438345 did as Warrior Lead 05423546 had bidden and beseeched the Nana to succor them in this time of strife. The sanguine-eyed sons of the vengeful goddess would soon be upon them, and he and his warband manned a heavy anti-tank laser array. He had heard from those few who had escaped the vengeance of the void black hulks and their burning eyes that their array had no hope of fulfilling its designation, but who would instead be better served as an anti-infantry weapons. For the powered armor, the terrible sons of the vengeful goddess Republic carried her furious blessing, and was impervious to small arms of the Exarch warriors. And just so with their vehicles. Anti-armor and anti-tank installations had little effect on the ground-shaking death heralds. The anti-orbitals had seen killed some of the beasts, but not many. They were fast, despite how heavy they were. Warrior 05438345 pondered over the words of the small flying machine, simple propellers and a speaker. Yet it had sent High Priest Overmaster Zavron Havon into a frothing rage with its mere words, and he had ordered it destroyed immediately. The Lady of the Republic desires not your blood, not your souls. She desires only your lords, your masters, your emperor. Render unto her sons these with your arms laid down, and her sons shall bring you to her very breast. For the succor denied you so long. Rejoice, ye serfs, for salvation comes. It had sounded a lot like the whispers what Warrior 05438345 had heard during the allotted socialization time, while indulging before the intoxicant dealers. The idea that simply because those born of a certain father and priestess did not mean that they could command his very thoughts. What reason did he have to serve Axur? Does he not demand that those he had grown up with in the raising places die upon his altars, for the promise that should he be sated, he should not swallow the Exarch whole? Is that truly better than dying upon the spear of the vengeful goddess Republic? Such whispers have been growing of late, and the flying machine seemed to offer a way to yet live. I do not desire to spend my life at the command of High Priest Overmaster, such that he might plunge his massue into a surf I have sighed and never even seen, Warrior 05438345 found himself saying. If you say such things, Warrior 05438354 said, the initiate highborn shall truly stretch you out over the altar. How can they reach me past this spear of the vengeful goddess Republic? He asked. I, his companion began uncertainly. I will follow, should you begin. Warrior 05438345 laid aside his arms, took off his helmet, and walked towards the approaching sons of the vengeful goddess, with a clasp in his hands above his head. When he was not immediately beheaded by their long-range marksmen, others followed his example. Soon there was a line of warriors amazed that they were not dead, being watched over by the sons of the vengeful goddess Republic, as they were directed away from the fighting. It seemed that the initiate highborn, the acolyte lords, priest masters, and the high priest overmaster were the ones lying. It had not been a vile deception to rob warriors of an honorable death. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.